Well, it's really a pleasure to have you, Tara, and Natalie here today. Thank you for coming on with us and talking a little bit about what you're doing in the world of providing healthy food for all of us.
Yeah, thanks for having us on. We're excited.
Yeah, and
thank you.
Maybe you can tell us a little bit about each of yourselves or what you're doing and how you're sharing your information to make all of us have healthy lives.
Sure, I can go first. So, as you mentioned, I'm Tara Dussen, and I am a dairy farmer in eastern New Mexico. I actually got my degree in environmental science, and so my role on our dairy and my clients' dairy is to assist them with environmental permitting, regulation, water rights, all of that kind of thing. I always joke it's like the back end of the dairy, the lagoon and the back end of the cow, basically. And so I started sharing, though, online about 7 years ago, I was seeing a ton of misinformation, and I kind of just wanted to share what I was seeing every day on my dairy, on my clients' dairies. And, along the way, I met Natalie online, and we became fast friends and ultimately launched our business together and started our podcast, Discover Ag, together.
And Natalie, how about a little bit yourself first?
So excuse me. So like Tara, I grew up in agriculture. I'm currently in central Nebraska, but I was raised in southwest Montana, very beautiful part of the state, on a cattle ranch. So I've always been familiar with ranching. It's what me and my husband do now. I did I don't like to say leave the industry, but I didn't get my degree in anything ag related. I ended up getting my degree actually in pharmacy. And when I graduated, that's what I was doing. I was practicing full-time pharmacy, living in a bigger city in Montana, which is obviously a very relative term. It's still probably a smaller city compared to a lot of places. But I really thought that's kind of what my path would be. I was still connected to my family ranch, but I wasn't living on it. My income wasn't derived from it. And I definitely wasn't sharing about it online. I met my husband, and that's how I ended up down here in Nebraska. And like Tara, somewhere along the way, I just kind of decided to start sharing online a little bit about agriculture. I really wanted to connect people to our way of life, ranching, Western industry, kind of just give people that lens. And like Tara said, it led me to her, and we created, we became really good friends. And then through that friendship, we also formed our business. And now we podcast every single Thursday about agriculture on Discover Ag.
Is that your business together, is podcasting and sharing information about our food?
Yep.
Yeah, we have the podcast together, and then we're working on a kind of behind the scenes project for hopefully like a docuseries that would pair with the podcast really well, where we could actually, give the visual component where we visit the operations and the farms and the families and storytell and connect people back through the food that way. But for right now, we do the podcasting.
And so we're all disconnected to our food in one way or another. I was talking to Natalie before you came on, Tara, about the fact I lived in Los Angeles. In the city, we'd get our food from a small food house, it was called, and we'd walk to get food, where Safeway wasn't too far away, but in a liquor store to get our food. So it was kind of very disconnected. I grew up, Mediterranean, but pretty much everything in LA. But we really didn't know much about the nutritional value, what of our food, what was good and what was bad, and where it came from, because it takes human beings to do the work that we used to all do for our food. But what percentage of people actually do the work to provide the food for the world? And tell us a little bit about why you guys got into getting back to providing the essence of all of us.
Yeah, so you mentioned, it's a very small percentage of the population at this point that's employed by agriculture, is involved directly with agriculture. And I feel like over the last few years, and I think COVID kind of accelerated that, people have been more curious about where their food's coming from. They're asking more questions. They want to know and be more connected with the people that are producing their food. And I feel like Natalie and I both felt that shift online and kind of wanted to be a part of that, like give people the information they were looking for, be there to answer questions, have these conversations, and not just have surface level conversations, like actually dive into what it takes to produce the food that ends up on everyone's plates.
And I think that's actually like the positive side of it, right? That like there's this connection, this drive, this emotional tie that people want to get back to their food. And that's why we share. But I also think there's this totally opposite side of the coin, this negative side, where I feel like there's a ton of misinformation. There's a ton of fear-based factor marketing out there. There's confusion. It's not a great time to be a consumer. Honestly, I don't feel like it's a great time for a consumer to go to the grocery store and feel really confident about what they're buying and know who raised it, where it came from, and how it was produced, what the labels mean, what went into it. And so I feel like that's another reason why Tara and I share too, and why we're so passionate about our podcast, is because I feel like there's a lot of negativity around food. And I think social media, honestly, is a driver of it too. There's people sharing about food like it's factual when I don't feel like they really have any connection or understanding of any of, what truly went into growing that food.
So how can people learn more about what they're eating, what should they be eating, and what's good or bad of what they're eating? Because really, my first question is the food that we're eating really bad for us in the sense of where it comes from, or is the meat bad, the eggs bad, the chicken bad, the beef bad, or is it really mostly good, but we're just all confused by a million stories?
Yeah, I would say the latter of those, that I think that overall, if you're eating a whole food like beef or dairy or whatever that food choice is, eggs you mentioned, we know those are like nutrient powerhouses. Those animal proteins are so good for you. They are packed with the nutrients we need. And I just think that there is, again, like Natalie said, so much misinformation out there that people become so fearful. And then we slap labels on everything because we want to market to these people, and then we want people to buy whatever product over another product. And it ends up just in mass confusion and a ton of fear-based marketing.
I also think we as a society are starting to confuse and blur the lines a little bit between healthy and safe. And those are two very, very distinct things. I always say, you'll hear Tara and I say it all the time, that we have a very safe, affordable, and abundant food system. Now, there are pros and cons to that, but that's where we truly are as a society. As Americans, we have a very safe, affordable, and abundant food system. Is it the healthiest food system now? No, like we have a lot of options to go out there that are probably not the best thing to put in our body from a diet standpoint. But that does not mean that it's not safe to put in our bodies, and that it came at an affordable price and you were able to easily go access it as well.
So safety of food, is our food today less contaminated than it was 100 years ago or 200 years ago? Are we less likely to get dysentery or other bugs from the food we eat because of refrigeration and maybe pasteurization for the masses as we're selling it? Do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think so. I've been seeing a ton online lately about pasteurization, actually, and a lot of misinformation about like why pasteurization started. And, food had to travel further. Like there was less people. If you had a cow in your backyard and you were drinking that milk that day, you didn't need to pasteurize that milk because it was gone within, 24 hours. You were consuming that product. But when you started having people move into a city and you had to go out to the farm, get the milk, bring it into the city, it changed hands, how many times people were touching the bottles, like all of those things. Then that's why, we created pasteurization, is to make this product safer, make it more shelf stable, be able to get it to people in a safe manner. And so I do think that there is some confusion there even about like why we do the things we do to our food, like pasteurization.
Organic versus inorganic, are those true statements that we need to worry about? Is it marketing, or how should we all look at it when we're going and buying our food?
This is always a tough one to dive into because I feel like, even food in general, I feel like it is agriculture, ranching, farming, food is kind of the one industry that emotion and science are really on level playing fields. And so when you get into conversations like GMO and organic, I feel like people really come into them from an emotional standpoint more than they are ready to hear about them from a factual scientific standpoint. Like food is just very personal. It's very emotional. There is differences between organic and non-organic. Like part of me wants to say it's a marketing ploy because I do think brands use it kind of in a sneaky way with consumers. But there is differences. Organic is regulated by, is it the USDA, Tara, or
USDA.
FDA? USDA. So it is a regulated term within agriculture. And it actually really comes down to farming practices. So it is not a difference in nutrition, but it's really how, the farmers have different stipulations that are upheld to them about how they can grow that food. So I don't know how deep you want to go into organic versus non-organic.
Well, I kind of always look at it as, food is organic. I mean, that's just the nature of food that we eat. But I guess whether you're using pesticides, I imagine, and all sorts of things, but there are probably some rules and laws that allow some and things like that. So it's such a confusing thing. Is it really the thing that changes the value of the food, do you think? Or really, for most people, we're feeding millions of people, billions of people in the world, in essence. What should people look for when they're buying food? Or I have my opinion on what people should eat. Where do you fall in on that side of what are the healthiest things, food groups? Do you guys talk about that in your blogging, food groups?
Well, obviously, we're big advocates of the animal protein part of the food group, specifically meat and dairy, obviously. As far as, the organic conversation, I know I personally do not buy organic. I pretty much just buy what's available at my grocery store, what is affordable, those kind of things. But one of the things Natalie and I are big advocates for is food choice. But I think the key about food choice is making an informed decision. I think the word organic, people think it means something that it doesn't, or they confuse it or aren't sure. And I just love when consumers actually make a decision because of facts. And I think that is really the key when you're making decisions in the grocery store. Don't just assume that something means something and that's why you're buying it.
I guess to keep, kind of feeding off that conversation, Tara said that people see the organic label, and I do think they instantly think healthier, and that's not true. So if you, again, going back to like bringing, science and facts into the conversation, there is no nutritional difference between an organic apple and a non-organic apple. They are still going to provide to you the same things an apple would. I think we actually talked about this on our podcast a couple weeks ago. We talked about the Dirty Dozen because I feel like that's one of the things that's like highly associated with organic is shopping the Dirty Dozen or not to. And I really think it comes down. What's that?
The Dirty Dozen. What's the Dirty Dozen for those that may not know?
Oh, sure. It is a list of 12 fruits and vegetables that are, I guess they're ranked by is the EWG. Is that right?
Yeah, it's the Environmental Working Group.
And they're basically the ones that they recommend people do. If you're going to shop these, they say you need to shop them organic because they have the highest levels of contaminants. But we didn't really dive into it, which is what we do on our podcast. They're not really bringing risk assessment into the factor. They're just basically saying like there are pesticide residue on this, and then that means bad. But everything is regulated through the FDA. Everything on that list is actually well below the standard limits that are acceptable and deemed safe. And so it's basically taking out all risk assessment factor, which Tara we dive into it much more on that conversation. But it's obviously like a very key important thing to consider when you're shopping the Dirty Dozen or why you wouldn't or would. And so things like that are missing, that nuance in that conversation out there about food. Like, again, yes, there's a difference between organic and non-organic. But when it comes down to it, like Tara, I don't actually shop organic intentionally because, well, a lot of reasons, but from a nutrition standpoint, there isn't going to be a difference. There's a lot of organic fraud, so I don't always feel like what I'm actually paying for is what I'm getting when it comes to organic labels. And then also, I don't fear our food system. I think a lot of people buy organic out of fear, like that it's going to be safer for them. And I don't, as farmers and ranchers, we are very, very close to our food system. We see it every day. Our friends are in it. I know the people who use pesticides, herbicides, the things, that people who don't see it with their own eyes and don't know the people growing it, maybe they have questions and concerns about that. I see those people. Farmers are eating the food that they raise, organic, non-organic producers are eating the non-organic food because they see what's going into it. They don't have a fear around it and they understand the science behind it.
Well, we drive cars, we fly in airplanes, we do so many dangerous things that we don't even think about walking across a crosswalk and cars are zipping by. And so we sort of maybe our risk assessment is completely skewed and we're not really looking at the things that really are getting to us. Now let me get back to a little bit about a meat-based versus a plant-based diet. What's your thoughts and ideas on that, and why?
So I will probably speak for Natalie too. We incorporate a ton of animal protein into all of our meals. Beef is, well, I say animal protein. Beef and dairy are the majority of our protein that we get in our household, and we eat it like every single meal. We also obviously incorporate fruits and vegetables, and I do grains, we do breads and things. But I would say like we plan our meal around what steak we're having for that. That's the core of our food is that steak. And then it's like, okay, building our plate out from there.
Yeah, so I'm not carnivore. Tara's actually talked about trying to go carnivore
I
before.
wish I could, but I have not taken the plunge yet.
But we, like Tara said, I have a freezer full, we harvest our own beef. And so I grew up that way. I mean, it seems very, very foreign to me to not, walk out to my garage or my basement or wherever you have, I don't even know how many feet long it is, but, a freezer full of beef. And I know that's very privileged, I guess, raising or, the way I live my life. But I can't imagine not being able to go to my freezer and pulling out whatever, whether it's bacon or steaks or ground hamburger or a roast or whatever it is. And like Tara said, that's how I start my meal. The first thing my husband says, what do you want for dinner? And it's like, oh, we're going to pull out hamburger. What are we going to pull out? And then from that, we, create the rest of the meal. And it's just because, like Tara said, I think truly understand how important protein is for our bodies. And I would rather be getting that from an animal-based protein than I would from a plant-based protein.
I always find it difficult to find protein in a plant because I've always thought protein comes from muscle. There's no muscle in a plant, and plants are made of sugar. And so ultimately, no one can live on plant proteins.
No.
They can't. So
that's one of the great things about animal proteins, right? Is it has all the essential amino acids that we need, whereas the other stuff are supplementing or fortifying it. It's completely different than trying to get it from that raw product, which is going back to, we've said multiple times, but like that whole food, that's why the whole foods are so important, because we aren't, fortifying them or adding in or, building them to what we need. It's like God created this for us, that he put the animal out on pasture. He intended it to do something that no other animal can do, which is upcycle that grass and give us a really high nutrient dense protein. And all we have to do is eat it. Like, it's a beautiful system. Thank you.
So fact or fiction, and a little bit maybe the why part of it, cattle are ruining the environment.
Yeah, that's always the headline I feel like that we're seeing these days. And the truth is very far from that. Here in the United States, animal agriculture accounts for less than 4% of total greenhouse gas emissions. And that includes, poultry, hogs, all of that. That's not just cattle. So it is a very small percentage. And I think Natalie and I talk about this a lot. I feel like there's so many different directions we could go in this conversation, but like, agriculture as a whole is making strides to be more reducing its carbon, more carbon neutral. But at what point, like, is the food system that feeds us 3 times a day, like, what amount of emissions is okay? Do you know what I mean? Like, so this is something we talk about a lot. That's like, how low do we have to get for us to feed all of us?
In order to grow the plants for a plant-based diet, what is the carbon footprint of that? That's the part that we're not talking about. And ultimately, you can't live without food. You can live without cars. Mm-hmm. We could live without trucks and trains and planes.
Yeah, and no one wants to have that conversation, though. It's funny. They feel like it's easier to just say, it's cleaner, right? It's simple. It's such a simple thing to just say, don't eat meat and everything will be okay, right? It's a very utopian view that just at its root actually is not factual. Like, there's a lot of problems and some major ripple effects we would have as a society if we actually tried to remove animal agriculture from our society as a whole. Like, there is a whole bunch of problems that would pop up if we tried to do that. Sure, we would have a lower greenhouse gas emission. Great. And I think studies show that, like, if everyone went vegan, it was a 2.6% is what our greenhouse gas would be reduced by. Great. Okay, we lost 2.6%. But now what? Like, we have all of these major unintended consequences, which we can get into because Tara and I are pretty passionate about talking about them. But no one else is. They're just so carbon focused that they're like, we got to get rid of the carbon. And how are we going to do it? And it's really easy to say, well, don't eat meat. That's how we'll do it.
Okay, so if we didn't eat meat and we went all vegan and it was all plant-based, what are some of the consequences of that?
So one of the biggest ones would be nutrient deficiencies. Obviously, I think seems like a very obvious consequence, and increased calorie intake also, which I think if you really think about it, the United States we do not need more calories. We need more nutrient dense foods. So that would be, some of the consequences as far as from a health standpoint. And then, from a food system standpoint, agriculture, animal agriculture, grazing cattle, I'll let Natalie talk about that, play in a crucial role in, the marginal lands that we're able to use. Cattle are able to use marginal lands to graze on that otherwise would go to waste. I think people think that we take cattle out of the equation and suddenly we're growing avocado trees. And that's not the reality. Cattle are often just grazing on grassland that it's only good for grassland.
Many of the foods we eat are very water hogs, and in the fruits and the vegetables that we grow are on industrialized lands, which require tractors and pesticides and fertilizers, and ultimately the land is not made for this constant digging up and planting new, is it?
No, so my ranch is actually a really great real life example for people to like attach to this conversation. I am in central Nebraska, and I am on what borders an area known as the Nebraska Sandhills. It's a very vast part of our state. It is actually the world's largest intact ecosystem still. And the reason it is that way is because we have cattle grazing on it. So if you followed along on my Instagram page, you would see us out at summer pasture. You would see these beautiful lush rolling hills, which I know is not typically associated with Nebraska, but it is. The sandhills there's this beautiful, beautiful ecosystem. It's lush rolling hills, it's grasslands. It's so gorgeous. And it is that way because we cannot do anything else with it. We cannot grow crops there. I'm sure we could plop a Walmart down there, I suppose, if we wanted to. But if we want to get into the conversation, is that really better, from an environmental standpoint or a social standpoint? Not in my opinion. So the best thing we can do for that is graze cattle out there. It's good for the environment. The grasslands they're thriving. They're beautiful. And it's good for us as a society because now we have, again, an animal that takes something that we cannot consume. We cannot take cellulose. We cannot eat grass and have it do for our bodies what an animal, the cow does for us. So it takes that grass, it turns it into that protein, it upcycles it, and then we get to consume it. It's a beautiful, beautiful system.
And then on the flip side of that, like Natalie's talking about her cattle grazing, my cows were dairy. So our cows are in pens, they're in confinement. And a lot of what cows actually eat on our dairy and all dairies across the country is byproducts. And I hate the word byproducts because it makes it sound like bad or wasteful, but really they're upcycling foods that would otherwise go to waste. And so, some of the things, like if you're wearing cotton shirt right now, when you produce cotton, there is a cotton seed that is left over. And our cattle eat that as a really great source of protein. That cotton seed would otherwise go into a landfill. And, you could apply that to so many things. There's cattle that are eating almond hulls in California that are eating, orange peels, all of these things that would otherwise go to waste. And some really great facts are if those byproducts, if you composted them, which I feel like is probably like best case scenario, you would actually increase emissions by 5 times instead of having cattle eat them. If they ended up in a landfill, you would increase emissions by 49 times. So cattle are doing us a favor by consuming these leftover products and then turning it into a nutrient dense protein.
For thousands of years, millions of years, and just look at the West, the Midwest, the cattle, the bison have been ranging, and also elk and other deer have been grazing for a long, long time. There wasn't agriculture to provide them with that. And so the natural grasslands are really critical to our entire earth environment. Is that true?
Yeah, preserving them is important. Like you said, ruminants are what do that. So like you said, cattle are actually in the same class as bison, as deer, as elk, as goat, as sheep. They're ruminant animals. And they have so many great things about them that are intended to exist and be actually a functional part of, the environment, the ecosystem. Their hooves are designed to actually aerate the soil. So when they're like walking around, they're doing things to the soil. Obviously, natural fertilization is a huge thing. So when they are pooping and peeing, they're putting back, nutrients back into the soil that they're taking out when they're grazing. And then their grazing is obviously a really key part to it as well. I mean, they are helping control invasive species. They're regulating the grasses. They are mitigating for wildfires. I mean, there's so many things that we do not think about if we're not familiar with the animal. But they do a lot of really, really important things. There's actually 5 principles to soil health. And the 5th principle to soil health is having an animal on the land grazing it. It's an integral part of soil health. And if we want to get into the discussion of how important soil health is, or people who are like, for the climate, saving the, combating climate change, saving the climate, it comes down to our soil. Like that is the one thing that can actually remove carbon from the atmosphere is our soils, agriculture. And so that's why, again, why Tara and I advocate so strongly for agriculture as a whole, is because we're the industry that can actually help, take carbon out of the air and help improve the situation we have going on.
It's the plants that make oxygen, and without the plants thriving. Question about, so back to soil health, because I live in Skinny Atlas, upstate New York, a lot of farming all over where I live. I see the plowing, the turning things over, but I also see times when they leave the different fields with other growth on them one year and don't use that. But ultimately, I was watching a YouTube video on erosion and rivers and runoff, and ultimately standard farming causes a lot of erosion of our lands, and how is that affected your ranching, I guess, for one, or your dairy farm, or just in general our environment? Do you think the erosion that we're seeing to our land is really critical in the soil health?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one of the things about farming that we're seeing more and more cover crops. It's kind of what you mentioned, where we're leaving, we're either planting a crop that is called a cover crop, or we're leaving old residue from a previous crop on the soil in order to help with erosion. Here in eastern New Mexico, our big erosion is wind. I mean, we don't get a lot of rain, we don't have rivers, so our erosion is a little bit different than what maybe people think about with water erosion. But definitely keeping that topsoil. I mean, there's like a quote that I love that's like, we owe our entire existence to the top 6 inches of soil. Like, yeah, we have to protect our soils in order to be able to continue to provide food.
And not to point the finger outwards in this conversation, because I really hate doing that. Before we hopped on the call, we talked about kind of how there's a disconnect between, our food and consuming our food and how it's produced, right? There's definitely a gap in the bridge there. And I said to no fault of anyone. So I don't blame anyone for not understanding, food practices or questioning it because you're removed from it. Like I would have a lot of questions about the oil industry. I don't think about, or electricity. Like when I flip on my light switch, I don't know exactly what went in to get it to do that. So when you're removed from those industries, you just don't understand. But when it comes to like soil conservation and some of these, regenerative things, I do think they're just starting to come into dialogue and discussion more with consumers than they are with producers. Like this isn't new to us. These conversations about retaining our topsoil, about the importance of, combating water erosion and wind erosion and all these things. Farmers and ranchers, we've been having these conversations for decades now, right? I mean, there are people, the ranch I grew up on was homesteaded in the late 1800s. My
Wow.
family, I'm a 4th generation. And so to pass that on from generation to generation, we had to recognize, okay, how can we stay in the exact same spot? Like you don't pick up a ranch or a farm and move it, right? So you had to have a conversation that said, how can we stay in this exact same spot and continue to do a practice that does take from the land, right? Like that's what ranching and farming is. We take to the land, but how do we give back to it in the same breath, right? And that is what we've been doing as producers for ever, because we are in the same spots and we are doing the same thing over and over again. And so we have been talking about this for a really long time. Like, how can we give back to our soils? What can we be doing better to, make our outputs, not as intensive? Like this sustainability conversation isn't new to agriculture. I feel like it's just kind of new to consumers.
And now with the COVID crisis, we've actually brought a new way of sharing and communicating, because I really wasn't doing as much blogging until COVID, and doing so much online and meeting so many amazing people through this modality of conversation. So ultimately, you're right. We take for granted so much, and quite often we latch on to complaints rather than the gratitude for everything in some way. And there's good or bad to everything, and we sort of all have to get together and work a way to make it sustainable in a conversation that helps everyone find a healthier way of living.
Yeah, and I think what you said out of there really stands out to me, that you're like, there's good and bad to everything. And that's what Tara and I really, when we have these nuanced conversations, whether it's coming on people's podcasts like yours or our podcast of our own, we really try and get into that nuanced conversation that is the pros and cons. Because, going back to what I said at the very beginning, we have a very safe, affordable, abundant food system. There's a lot of pros to that, right? Like, we could get into, do you like DoorDash? Okay. Well, that may change if you want to revert, our growing practices, to different than what it is now. Let's say you don't like conventional agriculture. Okay, well, as a consumer, you're going to have changes to that. Convenience may be one, prices may be one. There's different things. And so these conversations aren't so easy, where it's like, as you kind of said, let's focus on the bad and really hone in on that, which is good. We need to progress as a society, and we need to be doing things to better. But it's like having the conversation afterward of, what does that mean? Okay, we make this change that you don't like anymore, but here's what it means. Are we as a society equipped to handle that change? If so, great. Okay, then maybe we can look as a nation changing an entire, industry's practices. But it's like, we need to have more conversations about what that actually means. I think sometimes we ask for something without fully understanding what it really would change for us.
The important part is that we have a conversation about how to make it all better.
Mm-hmm.
And it usually doesn't mean throwing out all plant-based foods or all animal-based foods and or organic and all inorganic. It's working on ways that we all come together and continue to make healthy, sustainable, safe, and affordable food for everyone.
Yeah, I feel like it really takes all types of agriculture to make our food system. Like, you can't remove one piece. Like, I'm talking about all of, the byproducts that cattle eat. Like, if you took out, almond producers or almond growers, then, you're going to create a deficit there of something that, that it's going to have consequences. And so it really is all of it working together to be able to have this system that we have in place. And I mean, as we've been talking about, like, there's definitely room for improvement. I've said, like, a lot of ag has set some really hefty goals for making improvements on tackling, whether it's emissions or soil health or all of these things. But I think instead of just like blaming one or removing one, it's about the greater system working together.
Natalie, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your ranch and what your main focus is and what products you provide. And then I'm ask the same question to Tara.
Yep. So we run a lot of cattle. We are very cattle intensive. So we do little farming. We do have some farm ground, but we actually lease it out to like a local farmer in the area and let him farm it. So our cattle are going to enter the conventional food supply. So eventually they do get, bought by a feedlot who then will finish it. And then that gets, obviously sent packer, and then that goes to grocery stores or restaurants. In that same breath, I say that because people will watch my Instagram stories and say, how do we support a rancher like you? How do we know that all of our beef is coming? I would feel good about eating beef if I knew it was raised by someone like you. And that is a majority, I guess, of U.S. beef producers. I mean, I think there's over 700,000 families in the U.S. that are providing beef. The average herd size is 43 is all. So it's very, very small. It's a lot smaller than people will think. And our ranch is actually bigger than that. We are in the multiple hundreds of cows. And so we're quite substantially larger than the average herd size. And in the same breath, it's just me, my husband, and an employee. So we ranch every single day. We're out at pasture. We also graze corn stalks. That's what you'd see in the winter if you followed along with us. And then it's just kind of a cycle from there.
And how do people find you following your story?
Oh, sure. It's just my name. It's Natalie Kovarik. So that would be my personal Instagram page.
And can people buy half a cow, quarter cow directly from you?
If you lived in my little town, you could. But that's how I actually got started sharing online, was a direct to consumer beef business. So anyone who's listening who supports a direct to consumer beef business, thank you very much for doing that, because it is a very it's not an easy thing to do as a rancher. I think a lot of people just think, well, why doesn't every rancher just, sell their own beef directly to the marketplace or to the consumer? And it's not that easy to do. There was a lot of me and my husband encountered a lot of struggles. There was a lot of barriers and hurdles to it, and so I ultimately ended up kind of stepping away from, selling direct to consumer. But so yeah, ours just enters the conventional supply chain.
And is there so you sell your grass graze free range cattle to someone that's going to fatten them up in the short term and then sell them on the market. Tell us about the good and the bad of that. And I mean, that's my preference of meat, by the way. I love the grain finished personally.
I'm actually glad you brought this up, because this is another area that I don't think people are fully aware of. And I also think it gets twisted a lot, like marketing. So no matter whether you eat grass finished or grain finished beef, the first 2/3 of their life looks exactly the same. And it would be like a ranch like ours. It's called a cow calf operation, is what it's called in agriculture. And it is when you are raising, the mama and the baby together. So our cattle, well, all cattle, again, will stay together. The mom and the baby, they aren't weaned until quite later in life. And so for 2/3 of life, again, whether it's grain finished or grass finished, you're going to have a cow out on pasture grazing. The next step in the beef process then is when, if you're going the grain finished route, is when a feedlot would buy it from a family like mine. So the interesting thing about, sorry, these conversations are so nuanced. I feel like I'm hopping around, but
No,
an
it's
interesting
good.
thing
It's
about
good.
the beef industry is we're not vertically integrated at all. So if you were talking like pork or chicken, it's actually owned oftentimes by the same company from beginning to end. So like a Tyson would own chicken from beginning to end. In the beef industry, it changes ownerships about 4 different times, and it's usually family to family to family. Obviously, when you hit the packer stage, that is, well, it's, I guess maybe still kind of a family, but it is definitely a little bit different. I'm okay with people calling, the packer part of the beef chain industrialized, but I'm not okay with them calling anything before that, because it's really just families like mine changing ownership of the animal. So once my husband and I get done raising it out on pasture, then the feedlot would buy it and they finish it with the grain. And another common misconception is that that's all the cattle's eating is just corn, like it's just out there like eating a corn cob or something. And that's not true. It's usually a well-balanced diet that's created from a nutritionist. So that's actually a job. Someone's job is to create a well-balanced diet for an animal. We actually have them here on our ranch because we do backgrounding, which is, I won't get into it, but so the animal, if it's grain finished, it gets, a plethora of things, part of which is corn. Like you said, we're trying to fatten them up quicker. And then it would enter the packing phase. If you are grass finished, then it's not going to have those other things added to its diet. It's going to stay on a complete grass forage diet. But I'll say one last thing. Another common thing is that grass finished, they think it was out on grass its entire life. You can have a grass finished animal that is still in confinement. It really comes down to just what was put in their body.
Do you think there's a difference in the value of the nutrition from that animal?
No. Right now, studies show, again, science shows that there's not a nutritional difference between grass-finished beef and grain-finished beef. You can get into minute differences. One of the ones people like to bring up is the omega conversation, which there is a difference. But if you're looking at trying to get healthy omegas in your body, I wouldn't be looking at eating meat anyway. I'd be looking at something else that provides, adequate amounts of omega, like fish or something. So if you are choosing, I hate to tell people what to choose, because again, Tara and I stand for food choice, but I really believe if you are only seeking out grass-fed beef because you think it is, going to give you more nutrition, it's just not true. It's the same across the board, whether you're going from grain-finished animal or grass-finished animal.
Yeah, and I'm not sure we've proven that omega-3 versus omega-6 is the thing that causes us to be healthy or not. I think it's more the toxins we get from the wrong foods that are the cause of disease, and we sort of focus on cholesterol, omega-3, omega-6s, and we're missing the point there. So, Tara, tell us a little bit about your dairy farm and exactly how you share the health and wellness of what you do.
Yeah, so kind of similar to Natalie, but different at the same time. So dairy, there's about 37,000 dairy farm families across the country. Over 95% of all dairies are family owned and operated in the United States. Dairies like size, there's bigger, there's smaller, kind of as Natalie mentioned, but they are majority family owned and operated. And again, similar to Natalie, we are a conventional dairy farm. So our milk goes actually while we were having this conversation, the milk truck just left a few minutes ago from our dairy. That our milk just enters the conventional food supply system. But ours actually goes to cheese. We have a really large cheese plant in our town. And so the majority of our milk all goes to cheese. We're out in rural New Mexico, so not a very populated area. So it doesn't really make sense for us to sell fluid milk because that is obviously a heavy and expensive product to transport. Whereas cheese, it makes a lot more sense for where we're located. A fun fact about milk that I love to share with people, though, if you buy just the plain old conventional milk on the shelf at your grocery store, chances are it came from a farm less than 100 miles away from that grocery store.
Hmm.
And it probably left the farm less than 48 hours before then. So it is
Wow.
a very quick process of how we're getting that product out. I mean, obviously, it's a perishable liquid item, so you're moving it really quickly, but it kind of has a cool story there. And again, not similar to Natalie, people always ask, how can we get, your milk? How can we and I'm like, I think most of my cheese actually goes to like Walmart brand cheese. And so it makes me laugh because I think people think like, that it's, if you buy the store brand, it's not as good a quality. And I always tell people I would put my milk up against anyone in the countries. We have really great milk quality, and like the brand does not matter. Conventional like versus organic does not matter. Like, I mean, there's differences we talked about, but it is a nutrient dense product. So some fun facts about dairy.
And your dairy, how many cows do you have?
So the dairy that I'm on today, that's literally in my backyard, we are milking 1,800 cows. So it is a big dairy. I know that number always, I feel like, throws people. New Mexico is kind of unique, though, just because of our climate and our geography. We actually have the largest average herd size in the country, and it's about 3,000 cows per herd. And so this dairy that I'm on is actually a little bit smaller than our average.
I grew up in Southern California, and I remember as a kid, we used to go to the farmer to the dairy, and we get fresh milk and things like that. But I'm seeing a lot of dairy farms are being pushed out of the larger metropolitan areas because of the cost of land. Uh,
Yeah, it was funny because Natalie mentioned how long her family has been homesteading in Montana, and you can't just up and like move a ranch or a farm. But actually, that's happened to a lot of dairies. One of the things about dairies, as I mentioned, you want to be close to the people consuming dairy because of it being a liquid product. And so my family actually dairy farmed in Southern California. My mom jokes that she rode a horse down Main Street in Marietta. If you've been to Marietta now, you are not riding a horse down Main Street. It is a massive city. And so it pushed out obviously a lot of the dairies. And that's how we ended up in New Mexico, is because of, urban sprawl, that there was not an option for us to dairy there anymore. And it just didn't make sense financially because of the cost of land and the other things that you mentioned. You have to have, feed obviously to feed your cattle. And farmers were selling out. My husband's family dairy is his old family dairy in California is literally like track homes now.
yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's crazy to see when you go. I mean, he's like, I just can't believe how different it is than when he was a child. And so, yeah, that's exactly why we ended up out in New Mexico, is because of those land issues in California.
So cheese lasts. Beef actually lasts pretty good because it's all frozen. And I mean, I buy so much of my meat frozen
Yeah.
that it really, and we have to really honor our food system in America. It's probably one of the best in the world.
Yep.
Yeah,
And
I'm always really proud of and I think even, I mean, obviously COVID showed that we like have a pretty fragile food system, but we also didn't, I mean, we still fed people during COVID, right? Like there were some hiccups and things, but we didn't have, starvation. We didn't have mass food. I mean, we could have had major problems if you think about how delicate of a food system we have. And we still managed to feed people 3 times a day for that long through that big of a crisis, which is the first time we've ever been put in something like that in society. So I'm always really proud to be like a US farmer and rancher because I feel really proud of the products that we're raising.
So I imagine ranching isn't as worker. You don't need as many people doing the work, the cattle are grazing. But on the dairy farm, how many people do you have doing the work there?
Yeah, that is definitely a big difference between dairy and like a cattle ranch. So typically the average is you need one person per 100 cows.
Mm.
That seems to be like no matter across the board what size you are, it's just kind of like this. That's what works out. And so yeah, so we have employees. I'm about 100 steps from my milking barn. I can my husband always jokes he can hear the milk pump turn on from our backyard. And so it is a really interesting way of life living on a dairy. Dairy is there's a lot going on. Like there's trucks in and out. There's just a lot of activity on dairies. And it makes for a pretty exciting backyard, I guess.
So encouraging anyone at any age, but certainly young people looking for careers in food production in one way or another. What are we doing to help encourage that? Because everyone wants to sit behind a computer, which is kind of bad.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like there is like a misconception too that if you want to be involved in ag, it means like you have to be involved in ag like the way Natalie or I are. But there is so many ways to get involved in agriculture and careers in agriculture. I mean, my job title is environmental consultant, like not necessarily a dairy farmer. And there's so much technology in agriculture that I think when people really get into it, it really blows their mind. And so I do hope that we do a better job of attracting more people into ag, especially in the technology space. I feel like if you're really good in technology, you might be more inclined to go work for a big tech company instead of a big ag tech company. But there's some really exciting things happening in agriculture. I personally am very excited about the next 5 to 10 years in our food supply system and just changes that are happening and propelling us forward. And so it's like kind of thinking outside the box. There's so many different allied industries that support agriculture for ways for people to be involved in ag without necessarily like owning a farm.
Encouraging people to experience it, because since our food production isn't in our backyard as it is in your backyard, that's one of the issues. My parents lived in Tulare, California, and I lived in Davis, California, where it was just ag everywhere. But it is. I mean, one is we all need food. We love to go out to eat. We love to go shopping and buying food. We love cooking food. But part of the encouragement is how to get people to get out there and experience, because there's not just one job, there are infinite jobs. And I always say, food is the foundation of our cultures. Whatever, no matter what your culture is food is it. Are you, so do you guys both sort of focus on just sort of the omnivore life rather than keto, carnivore, or herbivore?
Yeah, my husband's he's dabbling with trying to do keto right now. But I am definitely just a proponent for like a well-balanced whole food omnivore diet.
Yeah, I would say we both are big advocates for whole food. That's our big takeaway for us in foods is like getting foods as close to the source of how they were produced or grown or raised is how we approach our meals.
One of my favorite things is like a really good salad, but I would never eat it without like a steak on it. Like my favorite thing is a steak salad. So I don't know. I think I'm just like a balanced girl in that way.
I that used to be my diet, and I went from keto to carnivore, after a paleo keto to carnivore. And I think there's, but as an omnivore, if you focus on the fatty meat, if you really get the fatty, high quality meat that you have, and the milk products. I mean, I'm cream, butter, and cheese. And then one other thing to talk about, we haven't talked about yet, is eggs and chickens. Have you guys where do you sit on the eggs that we're consuming, and where do we get it? Where's the production the best?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm a pretty big egg eater, but I know I speak for Natalie and I when I say we are just not big chicken households. And it's probably just because, as Natalie said, like I have a freezer full of beef too. We ultimately beef one of our dairy cows for our freezer. And obviously all dairy change career paths after a certain point and become beef cows. But I feel like it's very rare for me to go to the grocery store and pick up chicken knowing that there's a steak in my freezer.
Well, I've always
Yeah.
thought that. Oh, go ahead, Natalie.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, that ultimately there's a reason that beef cattle are sort of our number one meat that we go to. I mean, it really is. They're free range essentially. That's the very best. They've been around doing that forever. Chickens, most of it is industrial. Now, not that it's bad, but I think that it seems like meat is really the strength of our food, and it's simply the thing that everything is centered around.
Yeah, being in agriculture, I don't like to like point the finger at other sectors within industry, but if I did have to give an award, I would probably give it to myself, the beef rancher. I mean, I just do think it's important that people realize that they are. I mean, I alluded to this earlier when I said that they are, vertically integrated. So chicken and pigs are raised a little bit differently than cattle are. Like as you mentioned, as I mentioned, we're out at pasture 2/3 of their life, and then they enter a feedlot maybe, and then they get packaged. But I have never personally toured a pig facility or a chicken facility, so I'm not like an expert on it, and I can't point out, and I'm obviously not raising them. There are pros and cons. Chicken farmer probably say, well, we use less land than cows do. So I mean, you could get into some pretty back and forth nuanced conversations about things, but there are major differences. Chicken is also like a monogastric animal, so there is people who worry about like people who say, well, corn finished beef isn't good. You can't give a cow corn. It's going to be an unhealthy animal. And then you're eating unhealthy meat, and like that whole narrative. That doesn't play a role for me with beef. They have 4 stomachs. That's why they're ruminant. They have a completely different thing going on with their anatomy and physiology than they do than a chicken, which is a monogastric animal. So they're just chicken. I'm always really surprised actually when people say that if they're not eating a ton of meat, but they're like chicken is their go-to choice or something. I'm like, really? Like beef? Like if I had to pick any animal protein to consume, like I would hands down be picking, the hamburger, the roast and the steak and like everything that comes from the beef cow before I would the other. But I'm obviously very, very biased.
Well, we're all bringing our biases, but that's a whole part of the human conversation. No matter your politics, your religion, your food belief systems. I mean, we have to have a conversation in order to understand and learn what others are living and how we can all learn from them. Otherwise, we'd all continuously be fighting, and that's not where we want to be. Let's see, the milk and cattle, hormones and antibiotics and vaccines. You care to comment about any of those things and whether or not we should all worry about them? They're really a thing, or what?
I'll start with the dairy side for milk. There is no added hormones to milk. There is naturally occurring hormones in every single food, even plants. Actually, they have a lot of them. And the antibiotics conversation is always interesting in the dairy world. Every single tanker of milk before it leaves my farm is tested for antibiotics. And if it were to come back, and I'm talking to the parts per trillion, like as good as science gets, every single tanker is tested. If it were to come back with antibiotics, we have to pay for that tanker as the dairy farmer, and the milk gets dumped. If it happens like more than once, if it were to happen like a couple of times, like you would get to the point where people would not pick up your milk. Like they're not going to want it because you're going to have to end up dumping it. And so there's tons of checks and balances to make sure that there is no antibiotics in anything, all the way from the cow. So if a cow is treated with antibiotics, it's treated by a vet. We have a veterinarian that comes out once a week, and those cows are actually milked separately. We call them our hospital string, and they are milked completely separately, and their milk never enters or touches any of the food supply, like milk that ultimately enters the food system. Milk is tested again at the plant. There's randomized sampling at the grocery store. I mean, the amount of times milk gets tested is honestly like crazy. And then as far as, I know a lot of people always have questions about RBST because people see that label on milk. There's actually no fluid milk on the shelf that contains milk from cows treated with RBST. It's like a non-issue at this point. Nobody is using that product for fluid milk. And but people see that label, and so it brings up a lot of questions.
Can you just to spell out RBST for those that may not know it?
Oh, what it is? Oh my goodness, now you're putting me on the spot. Bovine.
Aren't you a dairy farmer,
I
Tara?
know. I'm like, wait, what is it? I don't even know what it is now. I'm so used to just saying RBST.
It's not an antibiotic.
No, it's not an antibiotic.
It's a vaccine strain.
No, it was so it was something that came out, I think, in the 80s is when it was originally introduced. And it was a hormone that we would give cows. It was a naturally occurring hormone that we would give cows to help stimulate milk production. And it was very obvious right away that consumers did not like it. Like it was not. And so I know I've talked to my dad about it, and he's like, I think I used it for like 1 year and was like, he personally just didn't even like it. And so that's a very common thing with a lot of dairy farmers. So most dairy farmers haven't used it in decades.
A bovine somatotropin, which are gonadotropins that we may use in order to help stimulate ovulation and fertility. So, but there's all these things. It's like organic versus inorganic, or grass-fed or grain-fed. Antibiotic or non-antibiotic. These are things that we all worry about, but they're probably the 1% issue. Would you agree?
Yeah. If for everyone listening, if there's anything you can take from this conversation, I hope it's that you could just take that you can like go to the grocery store and buy your food and know that you are getting, a nutritious, safe product that was raised by families in agriculture. Like that is the bottom line of what's going on. Yes, there's like more nuanced conversation with all of that, but I want people to feel really safe about going to the grocery store and buying their food.
So whether you're getting it from your local rancher, farmer, or your local supermarket, the foods in America are safe and really providing good, nutritious, wholesome milk products and meat products, because that's what we're talking about today.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, Walmart, Costco, Price Chopper, all of these places compared to Whole Foods or Wegmans, the meat quality, the milk quality, the cheese quality, the butter quality, and those private labels of all those stores are healthy, nutritious, and safe foods.
Yeah, we actually know one of our good friends' family raises the grapes for Walmart. It's like, I think one of my favorite sayings is the further you are from your food system, the more fear and questions you have about it. It's like, just because big is not bad in agriculture. And I think as a society, we really think that like the bigger, the more scary it is. Obviously it's the worst. There's, they're trying to do all these terrible things. It's a big farm corporation. It's big ag. It's all these terrible things. And that's not necessarily true. Big is not bad and small is not better.
If people wanted to visit you online, or can they come to your ranches and dairy farms to see what you're doing at any time?
I would recommend following us online.
How can they do that?
Both of us are pretty far out there, so I don't know that we're gonna have a lot of takers wanting to come all the way out to where we are. But you can follow me online. My name too, Tara Vanner Dussen, is where you can find me on Instagram. My husband also shares on Facebook, and he's the Milkman and Milkmaid, or we both share over there, so you can find us on Facebook. But I think the best place to find both Natalie and I is on our podcast page. Discover Ag Podcast, and then on Instagram at @DiscoverAg_.
Yeah, like Tara said, if you're listening to this, you're probably a podcast person. So, and if you like to hear more conversations around your food, that's what our podcast is. So we actually take the top 3 trending topics, or, ag and food news that week, and we give our perspective, as a rancher and a dairy farmer. So we covered, like, if you saw the headlines about the big dairy fire and you wanted to know more information about that, we covered that. If you want to know about like Bill Gates, buying farmland, we talk about that. I think this week we're talking about the appeal, the labeling that people are talking about putting on the fruit, we're deep diving that and giving our 2 cents on that. We're talking about, Tara, what are we talking about?
We're talking about Saudi Arabia buying or having alfalfa and shipping alfalfa back to Saudi Arabia. They are growing alfalfa in Arizona and then shipping it back to Saudi Arabia. So lots of just news that we get sent a lot of things. Like people will be seeing this, we'll see the same article being sent to us over and over again. And it's usually a pretty good indicator to cover it because people are having questions about it. And so, yeah, whatever's trending in the food and ag space, we cover it.
Our ranchers and farmers are feeding the world along with our communities.
Yeah, I mean, I think people like to say that's like a slogan or something, but like we live in a global market. There's absolutely exportation, importation, and what we're producing here in the US absolutely is being exported and helping contribute to like food security elsewhere. Yes.
Which is a big important thing to do. Do you think the war on and meat and dairy, because I think in some ways it's all about some animal-based products, what's the best way that we can all sort of think about this, look at it, listen to it, and maybe respond to it?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think that anytime you see some kind of headline, like take it a layer deeper. I think it's so easy for news outlets and media and anyone to just put together a headline that's like, cattle are killing the planet or whatever, like a really quick soundbite, and it catches people's attention. It sticks in their mind. But in reality, like there's so much more to that conversation than just that. So like dive a layer deeper and like find out a little bit more about, what goes into raising cattle, how they're produced, all of those kind of things.
We forget about faith. We're human beings, and faith is so important for us in our lives. We often focus on the worry and the negatives rather than seeing the amazing beauty and the positives of all that we have. With everything comes some hardships and challenges, but that's just part of the gift that God has given all of us. That's kind of how I like to see it every single day, and how can we each sort of give more information about who we are and what we do, and answer questions about the things that people are worried about. And I think the podcasting and the blogging is just such a fun, interesting things. I learned so much on all of this. Are there any things that you wanted to share that maybe I didn't ask, or you think is really important?
No, I think this has been such a good conversation, and we're just really appreciative, to be able to connect with your community as a farmer and a rancher. Not often do people get to speak directly with a farmer and a rancher. So thank you for having us on so that we can do that.
Well,
yeah,
we're going to
thank
link.
you.
We're going to link your podcasts and your blogging, and certainly that people can learn much more about it, because it's important for all of us that take it for granted that our refrigerators or freezers, or we can hit DoorDash and someone will deliver something that someone ultimately has put a lot of work in for all of us. But I want to thank you.
I was gonna say, if you couldn't believe it, I'm so rural. I've never actually ordered DoorDash in my life.
Well,
I don't know if I ever will be able to either.
I'm blessed. I mean, I can order my food from my market. They deliver all of my foods, and we have local ranchers and farmers. And, again, we're very blessed. And, one other thing is, for those people that live in the big cities, there are farmer markets that really provide a lot of great fresh, and people travel to those farmers markets, the ranchers and the farmers, to provide the cheeses, the milks and the meat and the plants that, for those that are plant eaters, or incorporate in their diet. So there's so much available for everyone out there.
Yeah, I think if you really want to get to know your farmer, your rancher, like that's an important piece for you. Things like farmers market, buying direct from the rancher, your beef, like kind of like Natalie mentioned earlier, is such a great step for you to just connect a little bit more with those people.
Well, I want to thank both of you for being here today. I really appreciate it. I've learned a lot, and we'll keep on following and learning more and sharing with our community, because our communities are very blessed and lucky to have both of you that are providing great food for all of us. So thank you.
Well, thank you. We appreciate it.
All right. That was really a wonderful podcast, and thanks for joining. And don't forget to check out drkiltz.com and Kiltz's Mighty Tribe, and the 30-day carnivore course, which we're still offering. The special included is Kiltz's Keto is